Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing simchat le'olam, kol ha'yeladim now. Simchat to the dogim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we bring joy to the world by talking about the prophets and their writings. But sometimes the prophets, or perhaps the sages who pick the Haftarot, make our job just a little bit difficult.
What are you talking about, man? The Haftarot and the trope are all joyous stuff, just like the song says.
Rick, you're right. But the instructions for what Haftarah to read this week are just a tiny bit complicated and maybe even confusing. My head is spinning, and I haven't even begun to sip any of that very fine wine that I bring along each week. But before I explain, I'm Larry Herman, and here is my very fine wine that I was talking about. And there you are, Rick Muller, the king of cannellation, and my very good chaver. We're talking Haftarah and trope, as we do most every week. Rick, how do you keep track of which Haftarah we're reading?
That's easy. I use the Eitz Chaim Chumash, which lists the Haftarot right after the Parshiot.
But what do you do when there's more than one choice? Like when you've got a double Parsha, like this week, or a special Shabbat?
I check with my handy-dandy luach, which I could have had before. It's pink this year, and it's put out by Rabbi Miles Cohen. Don't leave shul without it.
But what do you do when you're planning more than a year in advance for a bar bat mitzvah and you don't have a luach for that year in the future?
Well, then I either use heatcal.com or I grab my local Rebbe. Why all the questions? What's the problem?
The problem is that once again, we've got a Shabbat with so many possibilities, it's really hard to know what to do.
So it's just like Tazria last week.
Yes, but perhaps even more complicated. This week, we've got another double Parsha, arei Mot and K'doshim.
Easy peasy, buddy. When arei Mot and K'doshim are combined, everyone reads the last 9 verses of Amos, chapter 9, verses 7 through 15, the shortest Haftarah of the year. And there are never any special Shabbatot that change that, right?
Right. I've got that part. We combine those Parshiot whenever it's not a leap year, so 12 out of every 19 years, I'm sure of the Haftarah.
And here's another rule that's easy. Sephardim always read Ezekiel Chapter 20 when K'doshim is read by itself, and that's the Haftarah that we're discussing today.
Right. Rick, you're practically a walking luach. And since that occurs in the 7 leap years, I can say, if there's an Adar Bet, I won't forget.
You won't forget what?
I already forgot.
That the Sephardim read Ezekiel Chapter 20 for K'doshim.
I'll never remember that.
That's why there's a luach.
Okay, but things get more complicated for Ashkenazim for K'doshim.
But that's all explained on page 705 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash.
Explained, but still not clear. It says that when arei Mot and K'doshim are read separately,
when it's not a leap year,
Ashkenazim read Amos with arei Mot and chapter 22 of Ezekiel with K'doshim. But others do exactly the opposite. How do I know which we do?
You look in the luach or ask your local Rebbe.
But even that doesn't end my confusion.
Let me guess. You're noticing that the special Haftarot for Machar Chodesh and Rosh Chodesh and Shabbat Hagadol come into play.
Yep. One of them occurs almost every time it's a leap year.
Right. So Ashkenazim read from either 1 Samuel, Isaiah, or Malachi on those occasions.
But for which parsha? For arei Mot or for K'doshim?
It depends.
How do I know?
Read the luach.
Look. Go ahead.
It's really simple for Sephardim. They read Amos during non-leap years for the combined arei, Mot, K'doshim, Ezekiel Chapter 22 for arei, Mot alone, and Ezekiel Chapter 20 for K'doshim alone. It's only the Ashkenazim who confuse matters. So you either have to become Sephardi or you have to
Read the luach. Rick, I know that this year is not a leap year. Arei, Mot, and K'doshim are combined. So the Haftarah is the one from Amos. But since we haven't had a chance to talk about the Haftarot from Ezekiel, we're going to discuss, and then you're going to chant, the Sephardi Haftarah for K'doshim, Ezekiel Chapter 20, verses 2 to 20. This is part of a long harangue by Ezekiel recounting all of the sins of the people. But one of the most interesting things about the Haftarah is what we don't read.
Hey, you've had a hard enough time just trying to figure out what to read. Why are you worrying about what we don't read?
Because we start the Haftarah with the second verse of chapter 20. I was wondering why we skipped the first verse.
Okay, maybe we could get to Kiddush faster?
Not what I was thinking. Anyways, the first verse tells us that when this story took place, and the circumstances for Ezekiel's diatribe.
And why is that important?
For one thing, Ezekiel was really good at dating his prophecies. He does it 13 times by my count.
You counted them all?
Yes, Faria makes it easy. Anyways, this one takes place in the middle of the Babylonian conquest, exactly 5 years before the final destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So we know that it was in a time of great distress for the people.
And what's special about that?
Okay, I get it. Always in distress. But get this. The first verse tells us that some of the elders of Israel approached Ezekiel to lidrosh et Adonai, or to ask God for something.
Like you said, times were tough, so they were asking God for help.
I get that. But why is that left out? We know that the elders came to Ezekiel with a request for God, since God told Ezekiel to tell the elders that God will not respond to them in verse 3.
Maybe the sages wanted to make this Haftarah more universal and not place it in a specific time and place described in the first verse.
Could be, but I've got to tell you, I've always found the Torah portion for K'doshim to be very uplifting. But this Haftarah is a real downer for me. God and Ezekiel are really giving the people a tongue lashing. It's hard to take.
I hear you. But there's some positive messages in the Haftarah too. It talks about God's promise to take the house of Israel out of Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. We always like that. God instructs Ezekiel to remind the elders of Israel that God gave the people laws and rules to live by, that God gave Shabbat as a holy day and a holy sign. And the Haftarah closes on a positive note with the promise that if we observe the mitzvot and keep Shabbat, that things will be good. You just have to know which verses to focus on.
Rick, when it comes to knowing where the uplifting parts of a Haftarah are, you are my luach. Let's hear what trope drash you've got for us.
Well, it's Ezekiel, so we've got a couple of standard phrases that I really like. God calls Ezekiel Ben Adam, which we've discussed often, O mortal, son of man, Ben Adam. And we've also got another Ezekiel idiosyncrasy, his use of Ko Amar Adonai Elohim. He uses that expression more than 100 times. You've told me over the years. Only Jeremiah uses it more. We've got both Ben Adam and Ko Amar Adonai Elohim in verse 3. But things get really interesting in verse 4. Remember my theory about the importance of the munach, zakev katon in Haftarah trope when it's by itself. So verse 4 starts that way. Here's the verse. Hatishpot otam, hatishpot ben adam, et toavot avotam hodiem. Arraign them, O mortal. Declare to them the abhorrent deeds of their fathers. I love the arraign them part. I think Ezekiel would be saying, lock them up today.
I'm not so sure about that. But Rick, Alter has kind of a different translation, but one that still fits well with your idea that the munach zakev katon on hatishpot otam, draws attention to the words and emphasizes them. He turns the first part of the verse into a question. Will you judge them? Will you judge, O mortal man? Will you make known to them all the abominations of their fathers?
Yeah, I like that too. It still draws attention to calling out the sins. And the verb hatishpot reminds me of Abraham's trying to save the righteous of Sodom and Gomorrah back in Genesis by calling God out, asking hashofet, well, that's in Torah trope, hashofet kol haaretz lo ya'aseh mishpat. Will the judge of all the earth not do justice? Whether it's a question or a command, God is telling Ezekiel to judge justly. The elders know that word. They know that they're being judged.
Them and their fathers.
Yeah. I'm going to jump to verse 12, where there's yet another munach, sakev katon combination on the words liot, leot. You hear the rhyme there, the repetition, the play on the close homonyms, liot meaning to be, and then leot meaning a sign. The verse builds to the zakef gadol on the word lada'at, to know, the infinitive to know. The people should know that God has made them holy. They should know, but they don't.
So sad.
Yeah. Okay, and then on verse 16, which starts with the intriguing azla geresh on the word ya'an, which is pretty rare. The trope tells us that that's important.
Rick, I think I have an answer. Yan is not a rare word in the Torah. It's a conjunction meaning therefore or because. In this case, it's connecting the previous verse, which recalls that God halted the people's entry into the land flowing with milk and honey, to this verse, which offers the reason why, because they didn't follow God's laws and desecrated the Sabbath. So the Ya'an, or the reason, is the judgment that you referred to at the beginning of verse 4.
Well done. So let me finish by looking at the last two verses. They begin and end with the same three words, Ani Adonai Elohechem, which are very familiar as the concluding words of the Shema prayer. Here they form a chiasm, a bracket, with the lada'at, to know, with its zakef gadol as the fulcrum in the middle. I am Adonai your God. Follow my statutes, keep and do my laws, sanctify my Sabbaths, to be a sign between me and you, to know that I am Adonai your God. We should know, but we don't. It's God's continuing struggle against our ignorance, intransigence, stubbornness, refusal to live up to what is expected of us.
And you know, Rick, I think it works in both directions. That's why it's a chiasm. If we observe, we will know. And if we know, then we will observe. A very nice conclusion to the Haftarah, and one that does indeed connect directly to the uplifting message of K'doshim. We should be holy. As usual, Rick, you've managed to uplift me. And now, how about uplifting all of us with your chanting of the Haftarah?
Our viewers can follow the text on the screen or in the Eitz Chaim Chumash starting on page 713.
But first, the bracha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Vayehi dvar Adonai elai lemor ben Adam daber et ziknei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem Ko amar Adonai Elohim halidrosh oti atem ba'im chai ani im idaresh lachem neum Adonai Elohim hatishpot otam hatishpot ben Adam Eto avot avotam hodiem ve'amarta alehem Ko amar Adonai Elohim beyom bochori v'Yisrael va'esa yadi lezera beit Yaakov va'ivada lahem be'eretz Mitzrayim va'esa yadi lahem lemor ani Adonai Elohechem bayom hahu nasati yadi lahem lehotziam me'eretz Mitzrayim el eretz asher tarti lahem zavad chalav udvash tzvihi lechol ha'aratzot va'omar alehem ish shikutze einav hashlichu uvgilule Mitzrayim al titama'u ani Adonai Elohechem vayamru vi velo avu lishmoa elai ish et shikutze einehem lo hishlichu vet gilule Mitzrayim lo azavu vaomar lishpoch chamati alehem lechalot api bahem betoch eretz Mitzrayim va'as lema'an shmi levilti hechel le'enei hagoyim asher hema v'tocham asher nodati alehem le'eneihem lehotziam me'eretz Mitzrayim va'otziem me'eretz Mitzrayim va'aviem el hamidbar va'etein lahem et chukotai ve'et mishpatai hodati otam asher ya'aseh otam ha'adam v'chai bahem ve'gam et shabtotai natati lahem liot leot beini uveinehem lada'at ki ani Adonai mekadsham vayamru vi veit Yisrael bamidbar bechukotai lo halachu vet mishpatai ma'asu asher ya'aseh otam ha'adam v'chai bahem vet shabtotai chilalu me'od va'omar lishpoch chamati alehem bamidbar lechalotam va'eseh lema'an shemi levilti hechel le'enei hagoyim asher hotzeitim le'eneihem ve'gam ani nasati yadi lahem bamidbar levilti havi otam el haaretz asher natati zavad chalav udvash tzvihi lechol haratzot ya'an
v'mishpatai ma'asu, v'chukotai lo halchu vahem, v'et shabtotai chilelu, ki achrei gilulehem libam holech, vatachos eini alehem mishachatam, v'lo asiti otam kala bamidbar, va'omar el bnehem bamidbar, bechukei avotechem al telechu, v'et mishpatehem al tishmoru, uvgilulehem al titama'u. Ani Adonai Elohechem, bechukotai lechu, v'et mishpatai shimru, va'asu otam, v'et shabtotai kadeshu, v'hayu leot beni uvenechem, lada'at ki ani Adonai Elohechem.
Rick, that was great. But we still haven't finished with all the possible Haftarot for arei Mot K'doshim.
We still have one more. Ezekiel Chapter 22.
We'll get to that one real soon. In the meantime, thanks to Norm Gar for all the beautiful graphics, music, text, and editing. Don't forget to write us with your thoughts and comments. Our emails are below. And if you like our video podcast, please forward the link to your friends and family. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.